Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This is Micah's Legislative Action Committee, and we're glad to have you with us today. We have a great guest speaker and a lot of great information to share, so we're glad you joined us. Next slide, please. I wanted to just make note of the significance of today, September 11th. It is a day of remembrance for those folks who perished in the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And we also want to acknowledge, the wonderful role of first responders and those that, respond to national disasters, and also those folks that are working on the front lines every day. So we thank you. We remember those that are no longer with us and those that suffered. And it's a day that those of us that were alive and remember that day where we were forevermore. So wanted to note that. Next slide, please. So this is Micah's mission. We serve as an inclusive voice to improve systems and support communities in a way that leaves no one behind. Next slide, please. We have a great agenda today. We have a guest speaker whose name is LAC September from the Vera Institute, who's going to talk about the Fair Chance Access to Housing Act and a lot of other great stuff around justice for folks that are exiting the criminal justice system. Eric's going to run us through some federal updates. I will take us through a few state updates. And then we want to hear from you if there's anything going on in your community, any issues that you wanted to raise or talk about, and then some actionable things that you can do and some information to share about what's coming up in the next month. So that's what we have for you for the next better part of an hour. And don't worry, Amy's great about sending out the slides and information with all the links. If you don't catch it in the chat, we will send it out afterwards with the meeting information. Next slide. So I'd love to introduce you to our next speaker, our guest today, who is LAC September. She's a program associate with the Vera Institute. And without further ado, I saw Lisa. I will turn it over to her. And welcome.
Hi, good morning. Can everyone hear me? I was having some, okay, great. I was having some speaker issues. And Lisa, are you sharing the slides? Is that okay?
Ashley is, yes.
Oh, Ashley, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is LAC September. I'm a program associate at the Vera Institute. Vera works on criminal legal system reform and immigration reform, and I'm on the Opening Doors team at Vera. And we specifically work on increasing access to housing for people with conviction histories. And so I'm going to go over a few things. I'll try to be brief since you all are housing experts on this call, but wanted to talk about some of the nuances around housing for people with conviction histories. And just to start, I'll start on a personal note. I previously worked at a fair housing center in New Orleans, and so housing discrimination is near and dear to my heart. And I also had a loved one who was incarcerated. And so, this issue is something that impacts so many people throughout the country, and is something that I'm really passionate about in making sure that everyone has that access to housing, no matter if they have a record or not. And so something that we talk about along with, housing and so many issues that people face after their release is those collateral consequences of conviction or incarceration. And so knowing that these issues go way beyond the criminal legal system and that people, face struggles with getting a job, in some places being able to vote, to serve on a jury, to get food assistance. And so there's so many ways that record really stays with you forever, for a very long time, and impacts your life. And I did want to just note the magnitude of this issue. And so nearly 1 in 3 Americans have some type of criminal record. So that could be an arrest record. So that is a huge, huge number. So many people are impacted by this and face, these incredible barriers years and years and decades after their arrest or incarceration. And there are some protections under the Fair Housing Act, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, in that 2016 and 2022 HUD guidance, really detailed those more around the discriminatory effects of excluding people with criminal backgrounds. And I think the question now for advocates is, where do we go from there? How do we really expand those protections that do exist under the Fair Housing Act and make sure that people are able to access housing with even stronger protections? And so during the presentation, I'll go over the general housing landscape for people with conviction histories, policy efforts that are moving right now around this issue, and what I think is some very exciting work that we're leading with Nation Outside in Michigan. And so, Ashley, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but housing is a human right. Everyone should have safe, affordable, adequate housing. This picture shows a community in Florida that has sprung up where people are being forced to live because they have a criminal background, a conviction history that is a barrier to them finding housing. And so people's parole officers have to come under this bridge to check on them. And no one should have to live like that after they've served their time and quote unquote, paid their debt to society. And so this is what we try to work on. We're guided by this goal that a conviction history should never be a barrier to housing. And Ashley, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. And to zoom in on like what does this issue actually look like in terms of homelessness? Formerly incarcerated people are almost 10 times more likely to be unhoused than the general public. So, if we're talking about homelessness, we got to be talking about this issue. This is such a huge factor that people are facing. I'm sure many of you are very aware. And 203 per 10,000 formerly incarcerated people are homeless. And if we're talking about housing insecurity, that's nearly 3 times that number. So 570 out of every 10,000 formerly incarcerated people are housing insecure. And we know that this is a cyclical relationship. So people who are unhoused are more likely to interact with the police and to be arrested. And so people are going from homelessness to incarceration to homelessness to incarceration. And it's really this vicious cycle that needs to be interrupted. And Ashley, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. And wanted to zoom into Michigan of what the issue looks like here in the state. And so a recent MISHDA survey found that people with conviction histories face the highest levels of housing discrimination overall. So that's pretty staggering. They looked at all different types of housing discrimination, and this was the most prevalent. 63% of Michigan landlords indicate that criminal records have been a factor in denying tenancy. And the number of Michiganders who have criminal backgrounds, similar to that national stat, is nearly 3 million people in Michigan have some type of criminal background, so that could include an arrest record. And I think it's important to note that this isn't just about individuals. This is about, families, about our communities. And so 1 in 10 children in the state have had a parent who was in prison. So this is something that, impacts family units and beyond. And lastly, just wanted to bring up that this is, of course, a racial justice issue. And so we know in Michigan that Black people make up 15% of the state's population and 51% of the state's jail and prison population. And those disparities, carry over into the community, and so that more people are facing these issues who are Black and Brown in our state. And so this is a racial justice issue. And we can go to the next slide, Ashley. And I wanted to just touch on briefly some of the research that we've done at Vera on our Opening Doors team is around how many people are excluded from public housing around the country. We looked at Michigan specifically. We've also did an analysis in Oklahoma and are planning to come out with analysis around the whole country. But in Michigan, with the current policies of public housing authorities, 284,000 people are excluded from public housing who have a conviction history. That's more than 3.5% of all adults in the state. And we also wanted to look at, we call it a look back period. So from the time of when someone applies, how long is that housing provider looking at someone's conviction history or criminal background? Are they looking at the past 40 years, at the past 20 years? So we call that a look back period. And we found that if look back periods change to 2 years, so limit to only looking at 2 years prior to someone's application, that number would decrease of people excluded from public housing to 145,000. And if look back periods change to 6 months, it would be 54,000. I think it's small on my screen. But so, limiting that look back period would increase access to housing for many people in the state. And we can go to the next slide, Ashley. And so, we've talked about the barriers to housing that people with conviction histories face. And I think it's important to talk about what are the benefits to providing housing? And again, I'm sure you all are very aware of this information, but increasing access to housing for people with conviction histories will reduce homelessness and reduce that contact with law enforcement and also reduce crime. We talk about the police being kind of this big part of public safety, depending on who you talk to, but housing is really something that increases public safety. And so research shows, study after study, that housing decreases crime. One study found that it decreased crime by 80%. And it also increases economic mobility. Housing increased probability of reported employment by 24%. And so it's really a foundation that everyone needs and will really strengthen our communities. You can go to the next slide, Ashley. And that brings me to different policy levers and initiatives that are going on throughout the country. So I wanted to highlight a few of those that we think are really monumental and really impactful. And so in Louisiana, we have the Louisiana Housing Corporation made changes to their tenant selection policy. So the Louisiana Housing Corporation, that's like the MSHDA of Louisiana, so their state housing finance agency. They administer LIHTC credits to affordable housing developers. And so they, in 2021, so pretty recently, they changed their tenant screening policy. Some of those changes including that housing providers can't consider arrest, charges that don't result in a conviction, nonviolent misdemeanor convictions, and others when making housing decisions, admissions decisions. Also, another important piece is that they made it so that housing providers have to do an individualized assessment. So they need to be looking at not just, oh, this person has a conviction history in their past, they're not going to be eligible for housing, but looking at it more holistically. So providing an opportunity for the applicant to give evidence of rehabilitation, factors related to their crime, how old they were, how much time has passed, what led them to that situation, et cetera. So making sure that people are viewed in this more holistic way and for who they are at this moment and not just at that time of conviction. And the next thing I want to talk about is the Illinois Public Housing Access Bill. This was also passed in 2021. And I forgot to mention, for both of these, these were really advocated for by, advocacy grassroots groups on the ground. The Illinois bill was advocated for by the Restoring Rights and Opportunities Coalition of Illinois, and that was made up of, legal aid, homeless organizations, etc. And this bill, going back to that look back period, it limits the look back period to 6 months for all public housing authorities in the state. And so this is huge because it's the first state to really remove those key barriers to public housing and to have this common set of admissions criteria statewide. So we were really excited to see that. And lastly, we have the New Jersey Fair Chance and Housing Act. I think like an easy way to think about this is that it's essentially a ban the box for housing. And so this was also advocated for by the Fair Share Housing Center and others in the state. And it limits the use of arrest and conviction histories in rental housing applications. So it really outlines how landlords can look at someone's conviction history. And so kind of the Louisiana Housing Corporation is affordable housing, we have public housing, and this bill expands to the private market as well. So it covers all types of housing. And again, it provides, that housing providers can't look at arrests, expunge convictions, sealed records, convictions in the juvenile legal system, etc. And it also has pretty much a two-step process. So someone would apply to rental housing, they'd be screened on, other criteria like their rental history, ability to pay rent, of course, whether they have pets, etc. The housing provider can't look at someone's criminal background in that first stage. If the person is found to be qualified, the housing provider gives a conditional offer. So basically saying, you're qualified, you have this unit pending the criminal background check. At that point, the housing provider can conduct a criminal background check, but also in limited circumstances. So New Jersey has like a tiered system where they have different categories of crime and different look back periods associated with the types of crime. And a housing provider can consider, the ones listed in the bill. And then also there is that individualized assessment. So again, looking at evidence of rehabilitation, factors related to the crime to really make sure you're not just seeing that conviction history and denying someone outright. And we can go to the next slide. And yeah, I want to also bring it into Michigan. And so there's fair chance housing ordinances throughout the state here, similar to that New Jersey bill, but on the local level. And in 2019, Detroit passed theirs, 2020, Kalamazoo, in 2021, Jackson and Ann Arbor. So we are very encouraged by those efforts. Here we have Detroit's process on the screen. We can go to the next slide. And lastly, Nation Outside, and I don't know if I might have failed to mention, so they are a grassroots advocacy group membership organization led by formerly incarcerated and justice impacted people in Michigan. They have chapters throughout the state. And we are working with them on the Michigan statewide Fair Chance Housing Bill, the Fair Chance Access to Housing Act, HB 4878. And we introduced it in late June, very excited about it. And it's similar to New Jersey's legislation. So it would limit the use of criminal background checks in rental application processes. It would do that two-step process where someone's screened on other criteria, and then a conditional offer has to be given, and then they can look at someone's criminal background in limited circumstances. And it, again, has that individualized review process where the housing provider must consider that evidence of rehabilitation. So that's a nutshell of the legislation. And Ashley, we can go to the next slide. And we love your support. I did want to note, this is something that would be the strongest fair chance housing legislation in the country. So we're really, really excited about this being a potential model for the country moving forward and making sure that we can increase access in the best way possible with really strong legislation. So we're excited. We have a support letter with over 60 orgs on there. So we'd love your organization if they're not already on there. Individuals can sign on as well. We'll have a Capitol Day, October 17th. And, follow Nation Outside on social media, on their website. You could sign up for their emails. And we are hoping, knock on wood, to have a hearing this month. And so you can submit a card or a support letter if you'd like to support in that way. And, oh, thank you so much, Amy. And I'll leave it at that. And I don't know if we have time for questions, but happy to answer questions or take comments as well. But thank you,
Great.
Lisa. Thanks for having us.
Great information, Lisa. Thank you so much. I just want to say, and if anyone has questions, but I see Eric does. I do too. I just was wondering if you have a sense of what the average look back period is for housing providers. Is there, like 40 years you mentioned, 2 years? What would you say?
Yeah, so we don't have that information. It'd be pretty difficult, I think, to gather. It's, right now there's no restrictions on what people can do.
Sure.
Public housing has definitely been moving in a good direction. We were previously, a focus of our team was to do technical assistance for public housing authorities. So I think a number of public housing authorities have really limited that look back period, but the private market has definitely, not really been regulated in any way for this. So, and I think anecdotally, with Nation Outside members and others who have conviction histories, it's just a huge range of, forever look back periods. So it really, really just depends.
Sure. Thank you. Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, for being here. Great presentation. This is a great topic that could be quite impactful when we think about the legislation and trying to reduce barriers. But I do have a question for you about the impact of the ordinances in Kalamazoo and Detroit. The local work. Is there any data that's been gathered to show that there has been a positive impact as a result of that action being taken?
Unfortunately, we don't have that data. I wish we did. But I think that since all these ordinances and even the, state level legislation is so new, we don't necessarily have data. We were able to talk to folks in New Jersey. They have brought a number of allegations against housing providers in the state, and they've really had a lot of success around working with housing providers to change their policies after they found those violations of the law. And so we're encouraged by New Jersey's efforts. They've been really doing a big push around education and making sure housing providers know what the new law is and that they know how to follow it. And I know they've also been really focused on like the larger housing providers. So making sure that, those providers who own like a large number of units in the state have, comply with the law. So yeah, I hope that kind of answered. We don't necessarily have that specific data, but I've kind of heard from New Jersey anecdotally, talk to the folks who are enforcing the law there. So we're encouraged by that.
Awesome. I have a couple of other quick questions. One is, are you working with Safe and Just Michigan on this?
Yes. So Nation Outside is actually Safe and Just is their fiscal sponsor.
Oh, gotcha. I didn't realize the connection there. Awesome.
Yes. So yeah, they're very involved in partnering with them on the Capitol Day. And you guys as well. Yeah. So very excited. Nice. Thank you for the partnership.
Last question. Have you guys done some opposition research with respect to, who are the opponents of this? Certainly rental owner associations will be weighing in on this, but how strong is the pushback that you're hearing? And is there anything that we can do to help with our messaging if we're communicating with legislators that may address some of what you're hearing from the opposition?
Definitely. That's a great question. So we are engaging with the landlord and real estate lobby on this. We've had some initial conversations with them. I'm encouraged. I mean, I don't want to be naive. I know there will be opposition, but I think that, you know, with clean slate legislation, and the successes around that currently, there is such a strong emphasis on second chances. And so I think on that front, you know, it's something that everyone can agree on and know that it helps people to be able to move forward after incarceration. And so I'm encouraged by that. Of course, there is always that, you know, NIMBYism that happens. And I think a lot of that fear mongering that occurs. And so something that we're really focusing on is that public safety piece. I think that we don't normally talk about housing in that way, but you know, the research shows that that is the case, that housing does improve public safety. And so rather than excluding people from housing, you know, that doesn't make us more safe. Making sure that people can access housing makes us safe. So really making sure to lean on that in our messaging. And yeah, would love, you know, happy to talk further if it's helpful outside of this, but would love any messaging support. And we have a fact sheet right now, but we'll be coming out with an FAQ really soon that we can circulate too.
I don't want to take over this, but just to follow up on that, are the Rental Property Owners Association, are you working specifically with them?
Yes.
Because they have a legislative day next week.
Yes.
And so I was just talking with Lisa about the possibility of maybe us going in the afternoon after they've made the rounds and put out their messaging to have some impromptu meetings in the afternoon to try to counter some of the things that may be shared from their viewpoint in their morning meetings.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, would love to hear more about that. That's a great idea. I did see that was happening. Yeah, that sounds like
Lisa, there's a question that came through the chat. Nikita is asking about the look back period, whether it's 6 months or 2 years. Is there any recommendation on what it should be? 0 months? You know, because she's making the point that people need housing right after incarceration, right? So any data gathered about 0 look backs, or, you know, what's your thought?
That's a great question. So in the legislation currently, it's a 1-year look back period. We do expect some pushback on that. We'll see what happens. We unfortunately the research is a bit lacking in this space. We have a research team and they are actually currently working on more data to back up look back periods. And so that's something that, yeah, our research team is working on it. Unfortunately, probably won't be ready for a number of years to really do like a proper analysis. Anilu, our researcher, is looking at public housing authorities that have already limited their look back periods and you know, different recidivism outcomes related to that new look back period. So we're trying to hopefully boost the research and evidence in that space. But yeah, right now the legislation has a 1-year look back period. The research that we've seen definitely supports a 3-year look back period. I won't get too much in the weeds, but there is like a lot of issues with how recidivism is calculated. And so I think there's a lot of room in that space to kind of shift and to have more accurate data on how recidivism is calculated. But we are excited. I mean, Michigan has like the lowest recidivism rate right now that it's ever had. I believe it's somewhere like maybe 26%. Don't quote me on that, but somewhere around there. And so, yeah, there is some really good research out there that does show, you know, the longer someone's in the community, their likelihood of committing another crime significantly decreases. And then also that most people are likely to, majority of people only have 1 conviction. So there is some data that loosely supports look back periods, but definitely hoping to create more in that space.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And this is great information. And also, you know, we've signed a support letter. We will be participating in the Day of Action on Capitol Hill in Michigan. So urge everyone else to. And Lisa, thanks so much. Great information.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for your partnership. All right. Ashley, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide now. Oh, there's Lisa's contact information. And we'll send this out as well. Now we'll go to Eric for some federal updates.
Thank you, Lisa. And thanks again, Lisa, for being here and sharing the information with this group today. I'm putting up a slide that I shared at the last meeting, just as a reminder to everybody when we talk about the federal budget, just giving the federal update here. And I'm just going to focus largely on the budget itself, that the House and Senate both had some numbers put out. There was a THUD bill that had been adopted by the Senate, which is a higher number. So keep that in mind, that that's really the number that we're focusing on. And just wanted to kind of catch everybody up to speed from where we were last month when we talked. But the House and the Senate, as you know, went out on a summer break. The Senate returned last week and the House returned this week. And over the recess, there was actually still some negotiations taking place with some of the parties involved. So Senate Minority Leader McConnell and House Speaker McCarthy have apparently agreed to a continuing resolution on the budget, which means that if indeed they can't get all the budgets passed, that there will be an extension, basically saying, hey, we're going to have a status quo on the budget amounts that we have now. And so how that continuing resolution will come together is yet to be seen. And really what they're looking at is the end of the month as being the target for, because the fiscal year ends on September 30th. So the plan is that the Senate's going to pass all of the 12 individual appropriation bills, pardon me, and then would be pursuing a continuing resolution. The THUD bill is expected to come to the floor this week. It's as I referenced, the high water mark for HUD funding, that's the higher number of all the numbers that have been shared between the House and the Senate and the administration. The goal is to pass all the bills by September 30th. So there is a strong hand in negotiations with the House to get something done. Unfortunately, there is a wrinkle involved there. Just as a reminder for those who don't pay attention, there is a right-leaning group, the House Freedom Caucus, that has been putting pressure to get certain things that they want with respect to the budget, and using some leverage because they want to see some deep cuts in funding. They want a border security bill attached to a continuing resolution as well. So there are some things that would make that untenable, really, for Democrats to accept. So negotiations have to continue on. The Democrats in the House are looking for the continuing resolution, but they're also looking at a supplemental emergency spending measure to take place. House Speaker McCarthy could bring a continuing resolution to the House floor and pass it with bipartisan votes, but that is probably not as likely, simply because the House Freedom Caucus could be pushing back. And as you recall, he made a deal to become the speaker so that any one member of the House can actually put forth a motion that would say, hey, we want to have a revote on who our leader is. So he has to walk a very fine line to make sure that he maintains his leadership and not ticking people off within the party, because action could actually take place and move him out of that role. So he is trying to, I guess, cater to just about everybody in the party who has some preferences. There's also a disaster supplemental that's being considered that would be tied to it. And so the real question is, could there be a shutdown, possible shutdown? Yes. There is a pretty good likelihood there could be a shutdown. If there was, it would be a pretty short time. And the question is, who's going to blink? on it. Is it going to be the House or the Senate? It's going to be the Republicans or the Democrats? That will remain to be seen. So hurry up and wait. We don't know what's going to happen. Negotiations are underway. Nobody wants to have a shutdown, so there is an incentive for everybody to play well together. But again, if you have a strong group like the House Freedom Caucus pushing their own agenda, and you have a House Speaker whose seat is pretty tenuous, all bets are off on it. So that's the quick update there. I did want to ask, can we go to the next slide? I think I'm asking the question of during the break. Well, let's skip on to the next slide because I've already covered that one as well. Thank you. This is just a reminder. This will be in the slides for you to be able to look at afterwards, but these are the priorities that we've been talking about for fiscal year 2024. The National Low Income Housing Coalition has put these forth, so I'm not going to go through them, just as a reminder. Next slide. This is where I wanted to go. I wanted to know if anybody took any action during the August recess. We had asked everybody at the last meeting if they'd be willing to reach out to their members of Congress. So just wanted to know if anybody did reach out, if they tried to contact a member of Congress while they were back in district to see if they could have a tour or have a meeting with someone, etc. Anybody participating today that actually was involved in that kind of an outreach? Just curious. Okay. All right. Well, that's all right. I think that's all of my presentation. Next slide there. I guess I do want to just remind people you can always take action throughout the year. National Low Income Housing Coalition has a webpage that has a bunch of resources available. So if you're interested in that, taking a look at it, if you haven't yet, please do that. And just as a refresher, if you've been there before, you can go back there and get some access to some of the tools available for you to be able to do things at any point during the year. Next slide. And I am going to turn it over to Lisa, unless there are any burning questions, and I don't see any in the chat. So if you have some, you can toss those into the chat and we can answer those later. But Lisa, why don't you go ahead and just jump right on in.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for the update. So on the state side, we have a lot of bills that are either introduced or in the works, housing related bills, which is wonderful. This first one we've talked about before, but it actually is just went before its committee in the House and got passed. So that's really exciting. It calls for donation tax credit for folks that donate to food, gathering or food providing or meal programs, shelters, as well as community foundations. So that will be a nice boost. And this is a bill that we had that expired back in 2017. So that'll be good. So hopefully that will pass yet this session. We have Bill 4818 in the House. Representative Carter is the one that sponsors this. And it was having to do with utilizing a prospective tenant's credit score in terms of determining their housing eligibility. And it's been expanded a little bit. The language is being modified a bit to include more around the whole application process. So hopefully, again, that will get a committee hearing and move forward. Lisa talked about 4878, so we won't cover that, but we're continuing to support and monitor that. And then Representative Devendorf introduced 4919, which was a homeless bill of rights. And she also talked about a package of bills. We haven't seen any of the other ones yet, but there could be more to come around that one, as well as other bills in the work around junk rental fees, application fees, and eviction expungement that we know some members are working on. So hopefully there will be a lot of movement. There's about 2 months left in this session, 2.5 months, depending upon what transpires. So hopefully we will get those, some of them through committees and onto the floor. Next slide, please. Thanks, Ashley. Wanted to talk about source of income protections. As you know, that went to the Senate Housing Committee. It was approved back earlier this spring. There's a Senate vote pending. You need to know that there are still negotiations going back and forth. Got an email on Friday with some new language, and we're trying to hold our ground, but of course there's always, you know, in negotiations, sometimes there are things that you have to give. So we are working on that unit threshold for which the legislation, you know, whatever number would be excluded. We want it to be a low number. So we're kind of talking about that as well as a few other issues, but some legislation is better than no legislation. So hopefully we will get this to the Senate. We don't have a date. We do have a sign-on letter for organizations, and this is just an example. Ashley put together a visual with all of the logos of all the organizations that have signed on thus far, and there are more to come. So what you can do right now while we're waiting is continue to do outreach to your legislative member in the House and Senate to voice your support. We also have a municipal support letter for those, I think it's about 12 or 13 communities in Michigan that do have source of income protections, including Kalamazoo, Jackson, Lansing, East Lansing, Ann Arbor, Oakland County, County Commission did an ordinance. So we're asking those municipalities to put together a support letter to indicate their support for this statewide legislation. Next slide, please. Just want to kind of remind people that this is going on. There's, of course, Michigan's statewide housing plan that was introduced last year. And now there are regional housing partnership meetings that are happening. A draft plan is being put together by each region. And this is a way for you to plug in and get engaged with your, you know, local community partners on what the gaps are, what the needs are in terms of housing in your local area. And it's a great way to have conversation and kind of work on some plans for what's needed. And there is some money to be had. MSHDA has designated a small amount this year and for next year for each region. So definitely a place to get engaged. And I can put a link in the chat for those organizations that are leading that. In every community, it's different. So here is the link there where you can take a peek. Next slide, please. Ashley, to you.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. I'm just going to jump in really quick to talk about our Homes, Our Votes election work. So next week upcoming is National Voter Registration Day, which is on September 19th. And this is a nationwide event where organizations all over the country are going to be helping people get registered to vote. So Mike has decided to participate this year as a part of our Homes, Our Votes grant. And so we're hosting 2 events that week. Our first event will be hosting at the Delanis Center in Ann Arbor, and that's a homeless shelter, and we'll be hosting that on Monday, September 18th. And our second event will be at Advent House, which is a day shelter and service organization on September 20th, that Wednesday. And so what our events are going to look like is we'll have some MICA staff along with college student volunteers that I've sourced from the University of Michigan, where I go, as well as MSU, to help people register to vote. So we'll have some tables set up where we're going to be distributing materials that we've created with unhoused people in mind. And we're also going to have opportunities for individuals to register online, as well as to check their registration status, which is really important because most people will say that they're registered to vote, but a lot of people don't know where their exact address is or the last place that they've registered. And then this is just a great opportunity as well, I think, to have students just be able to interact with people in shelters and to have people be a little more involved in their communities. And this is also really important because the primaries are in February this year. The exact date is not set in stone yet. They still have to do some negotiations over this, but the primaries in Michigan are going to be some of the earliest in the country this year. So registering people right now is really important. And thanks for listening.
Thanks, Ashley. Ashley's done some great work around organizing this for us. So we're really excited about it. And, you know, you can get involved as well. We have materials that we put together. Ashley's done a great job focusing on, you know, how people who are unhoused can vote, how they can register, how they can vote, as well as people in housing. So it doesn't matter what organization type that you represent or work with, we have materials for everyone. It's really super important. You know, research shows that people with the lowest incomes tend to be the least likely and able to vote. So we're going to be pushing out information, you know, in the run up to the primaries between now and February. And also ways people can use the absentee ballot process to vote at home as well. And it's really permanent. If you sign yourself up, it's a permanent way of putting yourself on the list to get that by mail. So look for more from us. But if you have any questions, you can feel free to contact any of us. Thanks,
And
Ashley.
I'm sorry to interrupt,
Hi.
Lisa, before we go off this slide. On Friday, September 15th, if you're on our mailing list, I'll be sending an email out that'll have some images that you can really easily download to your own social media platforms to direct your followers on some of these steps that Ashley and Lisa have identified with links. And I'm sure most of you are already on it, but that'll be sent out the Friday before the National Voter Registration Day. And then you can, to the extent you're comfortable, support that on your own platforms as well with the images we provide. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. And it's definitely nonpartisan work. So we just support people, you know, making their voice heard and voting, whatever way they want to. So it's really important. Thank you. All right. We also, a couple things from us, just want to note that it's still AmeriCorps host site recruitment time until the end of this week. So there's an opportunity if you need capacity building efforts at your organization, providing support services to folks that are either, you know, in a housing crisis or at risk of homelessness. And so here's a few examples of something, if you had an AmeriCorps member, kind of different things they can do, to really important work that they can do. So if you need, if you want to reach out and find out about it, you can contact Kelly Beavers on our staff, and she can let you know all about that. And there's also a link on the slide. Next. Couple other updates. It is National Suicide Prevention Month this September, and we are having a training on Monday, September 18th at 1 o'clock. It's around suicide prevention. And then we're also hosting a conversation for folks that are decision makers around training at their agencies. So we're having a training roundtable this Friday on September 15th. So if you're interested in participating in that, we would welcome you. If you're a decision maker around training, we'd love to have you. Next slide, please. Just a couple other things we wanted to put on your radar. There is an ongoing webinar series from our partners at National Low Income Housing Coalition, the National Alliance, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and this afternoon at 2:30 is actually the next one. It's a series on housing first and homelessness, and it's been really wonderful. They have the previous trainings, the previous webinars archived, so you can see the recordings, but I would highly encourage them, and I always try to make them as well. They're really great. And then we just want to make sure that you're aware that coming up in November, it's Homeless Awareness Month. And we have our theme, which is everyone has a role to play in ending homelessness. Amy has put together a great toolkit, and we want you to really be thinking now about how you can commemorate the month, if you want to do events or activities or just publicize. Amy, do you have anything more you'd like to share?
Similar to the voter registration piece, a lot of agencies have just shared with me what they appreciate most are images that they can use that week or month. to put on their own social media platforms. And so the theme around that this year will be around voting, about volunteerism, and then about voice. The first two are pretty self-explanatory. To get out the vote, the one is volunteering, is where to find volunteers or thank your volunteers. And then the third set of images around voice will be, where can you just get reliable statistics to share with your followers to get valid housing statistics and information to share. So you can just use one component of it, all three, but that, even if you're not planning any other activities, we'll have a suite of images that you can use to put out on your newsletters and social media platforms. If you are doing an event, and I've been sitting in at COC meetings, and there are a handful of people that have started, and if you haven't, it's okay, there's still time. But on that website, fill out the Google form and let me know, because we promote that on a statewide HAM calendar. And then I also promote it in our newsletters and social media platforms of who's doing what, just to elevate that work and let more people know what you're doing. And lastly, if you've never done it before, you've never heard of HAM and you haven't started, don't panic. Just email me and we can chat. I have a whole directory of smaller scale projects that could be readily implemented in the time that we have. Thanks.
I'd like to add just very quickly, within the context of advocacy, Homeless Awareness Month is a great opportunity to reach out to an elected official. Doesn't matter what level it is, local, state, or federal. Sharing information with them at the very least is important. That's a great reason to contact their office to share the information with them, but certainly is a good way to open the door to a conversation by trying to have a meeting scheduled with them or share information with them specific to Homeless Awareness Month as an observance. So it's a good hook, and you should run with it. Doesn't cost you anything. We let you use that for free.
Absolutely. Thanks, Eric. And by then, actually, the annual progress report from the campaign to end homelessness will be out. And so there'll be a lot of great data that you can use and information that you can share about the current state of homelessness statewide and in your community. So that's, you can look forward to that, I believe, in a couple weeks.
Hopefully.
Next slide. I know Jason's on. If you want to give us any more time frames, if there is any on that, that'd be great. Just a reminder, these are Micah's policy priorities. We'll be taking probably a little look at that, whether we need to refresh anything or add anything for the coming year. That will probably be towards the end of this year, next couple of months. Next slide, please. So anything going on in your community, this is the time where we love to hear about you, questions that you have. Oh, thank you, Jason. Jason's saying that they're still looking at the end of October, early November for the release of the annual report. And I also failed to mention the Summit on Ending Homelessness should be opening the registration soon. It is October 23rd and 24th. Next month up at Shaney Creek in Bel Air, Michigan, and lots of great sessions and speakers. And so I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that as well. So the floor is yours. And Nikita.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
So we actually have an organization here in Grand Rapids that sent some folks to the Rent is Too Dang High protest from last week.
Yes. How was that?
I wish I could have attended. I wasn't able to go because it was on a work day, but a different, another job work day. But honestly, I heard a lot of great things and folks are feeling energized about it again. And I've been seeing a lot of energy behind our tenant rights movement here in Grand Rapids. So I'm hoping to get more involved on that end, just here in my local area again.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. We didn't attend. It was the first day back after Labor Day, so it was kind of a busy day, but I did see that even though the legislature was not in session that day, there were quite a few legislators that participated. Jason Morgan, I saw Dievendorf there. Yeah, I saw different news coverages of it. And so, yes, we love to put, that issue back front and center about, it's really hard for people to afford these rents that are being charged right now. So great. Thanks for mentioning. And yeah, we continue to do all the tenant protection work around housing. Yeah. And Jason, thank you. Jason was saying, waiting for the room block to be released from the, Shaney Creek, and then the information on registration will be released very shortly. So look out for that. Anyone else? Other thoughts, comments? We got 3 minutes. All right. We can move on to the next slide. Thanks for your comments. Always be looking for us. We're on social media. We send out newsletters, and we have a website that Amy's continually updating. So feel free to take a gander there. We have a lot of the information and materials and ways that you can get engaged and active in some of these advocacy issues on our website, as well as our social media platforms. Next slide. And we really appreciate you and all that you bring from your communities and your organizations to this work. And we look forward to partnering with you throughout the rest of this year and into next year. So thank you so much for being with us today.